The rain poured down in sheets, casting an eerie glow over the quiet suburban streets. Suddenly, a shrill scream pierced the silence, followed by the wail of sirens. Homeowners Association President Karen Wilkins burst out of her front door, her usually impeccable appearance disheveled. "They're trespassing on my property," she shrieked into her phone. "Send the police immediately." Across the cul-de-sac, the lights flickered in the old farmhouse that had been a thorn in Karen's side for years. She watched with narrowed eyes as a figure emerged from the shadows, slowly making their way towards her. Asterisk. "Mrs. Wilkins." Asterisk. A deep voice rumbled. Asterisk. "What seems to be the problem?" Asterisk. Karen's grip tightened on her phone as Sheriff Daniels approached, his uniform crisp and his expression unreadable. "There are illegal squatters on my land," she declared. "I want them removed at once." The sheriff glanced towards the farmhouse, his brow furrowing. Asterisk. "Mom, that property belongs to the Hanson family. They've lived there for generations." Asterisk. Karen's face flushed with indignation. "I don't care. They're violating HOA regulations, and I won't stand for it any longer." Sheriff Daniels held up a hand, his tone calm but firm. Asterisk. "I'm afraid I can't simply remove them without cause. If you have a legitimate grievance, we can discuss it. But I won't be strong-arming law-abiding citizens off their own land." Asterisk. Karen's eyes narrowed, and she leaned in closer, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea what's at stake here, Sheriff. This isn't just about some old farmhouse. There are millions of dollars on the line." The sheriff's expression darkened, and he took a step back, his hand instinctively moving towards his sidearm. Asterisk. "Are you threatening me, Mrs. Wilkins?" Asterisk. Karen's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Of course not, Sheriff. I'm simply..." Asterisk. "Suggesting asterisk that you reconsider your position. After all, the HOA has asterisk connections asterisk. Powerful ones." The sound of a car door slamming drew their attention, and they both turned to see a sleek black SUV pulling up to the curb. Karen's grin widened as two men in crisp suits emerged, their faces hidden in the shadows. Asterisk. "Mrs. Wilkins." Asterisk. One of the men said, his voice smooth and measured. Asterisk. "We've been expecting you." Asterisk. Karen straightened her shoulders, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. "Gentlemen, I believe we have some business to discuss." Sheriff Daniels glanced between the newcomers and Karen, a knot of unease forming in the pit of his stomach. Asterisk. "I think it's best if I stay and observe," asterisk, he said, his hand still resting on his sidearm. Karen's expression darkened, but she nodded, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Of course, Sheriff. The more the merrier." As the men in suits approached the farmhouse, the sheriff couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled into a web of corruption and deceit that ran deeper than he could have imagined. The rain continued to fall, the sound of it drumming against the pavement like the relentless march of fate. Something was about to go terribly wrong, and Sheriff Daniels knew he couldn't stop it. All he could do was watch and wait, praying that he wasn't about to become entangled in a power struggle that would consume them all. The air was thick with tension as the three men approached the farmhouse, their footsteps muffled by the rain. Sheriff Daniels trailed behind, his instincts telling him that he was about to witness something truly sinister. As they reached the front door, one of the suited men stepped forward and knocked, his knuckles rapping against the worn wood with a sense of authority. The door creaked open, and a weathered face peered out, eyes narrowing suspiciously. Asterisk. "What do you want?" Asterisk. The man asked, his gruff voice laced with mistrust. The suited man flashed a placating smile. Asterisk. "Mr. Hanson, I'm afraid we have some unfinished business to discuss. May we come in?" Asterisk. The old farmer's gaze shifted to Karen, and his expression darkened. Asterisk. "You." Asterisk. He growled. Asterisk. "What are you up to now?" Asterisk. Karen stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Mr. Hanson, I'm simply here to ensure that you comply with the HOA's regulations." As you know, your property is in violation, and we can't allow that to continue. Mr. Hansen's eyes narrowed to slits, and he tightened his grip on the door. Asterisk, the HOA can go to hell. This land has been in my family for generations, and I ain't about to let some power-hungry bureaucrats take it from me. Asterisk. The suited man cleared his throat, drawing the farmer's attention. Asterisk, Mr. Hansen, I'm afraid it's not quite that simple. You see, the HOA has certain asterisk connections asterisk that make them a very formidable adversary. I'd advise you to reconsider your position. Asterisk. Mr. Hansen's expression darkened, and he shook his head slowly. Asterisk, I don't care who you're connected to. This is my home, and I'm not going anywhere. Asterisk. Sheriff Daniels watched the exchange, his hand gripping the handle of his sidearm as a sense of unease settled over him. He could feel the tension building, the air practically crackling with the threat of violence. Suddenly, a commotion from inside the farmhouse drew their attention. A woman's voice could be heard, followed by the sound of a child's crying. Mr. Hansen's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his weathered features. Asterisk Edith. What's going on in there? Asterisk, he called out, his voice betraying a rare moment of vulnerability. The suited man seized the opportunity, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Asterisk, Mr. Hansen, we understand this must be a difficult time for you and your family. However, we're simply here to ensure that the HOA's rules are being followed. Surely you can see the logic in that asterisk. Mr. Hansen's jaw tightened, and he glanced back towards the farmhouse, the sounds of distress only growing louder. Sheriff Daniels could see the conflict etched onto the old man's face, the weight of his impossible decision clearly taking its toll. Finally, with a defeated sigh, Mr. Hansen stepped aside, allowing the three men to enter. As they passed, Karen flashed the sheriff a triumphant grin, her eyes gleaming with a dark, calculating edge. The farmhouse was a study in contrasts, the warmth of a family home juxtaposed with the chill of impending doom. Edith, Mr. Hansen's wife, held a young child close, her face pale with fear. Asterisk, what do you want from us? Asterisk, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The suited man stepped forward, his expression one of calculated indifference. Asterisk. Mrs. Hansen, we're simply here to ensure that your family's property is brought into compliance with the HOA's regulations. I'm sure we can come to an asterisk agreeable asterisk solution. Asterisk. Sheriff Daniels felt a knot of dread forming in the pit of his stomach. He knew in his gut that this was no simple property dispute. There was something much more sinister at play. As he watched the scene unfold, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to witness the beginning of a battle that would tear this community apart. The tension in the farmhouse was palpable as the suited men surveyed their surroundings, their calculating gazes scanning every corner of the modest living room. Sheriff Daniels stood by, his hand hovering near his sidearm, the unease in his gut growing with every passing moment. As you can see, Mr. Hansen, one of the suited men began, his voice smooth and measured. Your property is in clear violation of several HOA regulations. The overgrown landscaping, the dilapidated barn, his eyes narrowed as he took in the family's modest furnishings, lack of proper upkeep. Mr. Hansen bristled, his eyes flashing with defiance. This is my home and my family's land. We've lived here for generations, and we ain't about to let some city slickers come in and tell us how to live. The man's companion stepped forward, his expression one of feigned sympathy. We understand your position, Mr. Hansen. Truly, we do. But the HOA has certain standards that must be upheld. Surely you can appreciate the need for order and uniformity in a community such as this. Edith Hansen tightened her grip on the child in her arms, her eyes darting nervously between the intruders and her husband. Please, can't you just leave us alone? We've done nothing wrong. Karen Wilkins, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally spoke up, her voice dripping with false concern. Oh, Mrs. Hansen, I assure you, we have no desire to cause you or your family any trouble. We simply want to ensure that everyone in our community is living up to the standards we've all agreed to. Mr. Hansen's gaze snapped to Karen, his expression darkening with barely contained rage. You and your precious HOA can take your standards and shove them where the sun don't shine. This land is ours, and we ain't going anywhere. The suited men exchanged a knowing glance, and the one who had spoken first turned to Sheriff Daniels, his tone polite but firm. Sheriff, I believe it's time we take this matter to the next level. This family is clearly in violation of the HOA's regulations, and we need to ensure that they comply. Sheriff Daniels felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implication of the man's words. I'm afraid I can't simply evict this family without due process, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. Karen stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. Sheriff, I believe you're forgetting who you work for. The HOA has certain connections that could make your life very difficult if you don't cooperate. The sheriff's jaw tightened, and he could feel the weight of his badge, the symbol of his duty, pressing against his chest. Mrs. Wilkins, I'm not going to be strong-armed into violating the law, no matter who you think you're connected to. The suited men exchanged another glance, and the one who had spoken first turned to Mr. Hansen, his expression hardening. Mr. Hansen, I'm afraid we're going to have to insist that you comply with the HOA's regulations. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. Mr. Hansen stepped forward, his weathered face set in a determined scowl. You can take your legal action and shove it. This is my home, and I ain't going anywhere. The tension in the room reached a breaking point, and Sheriff Daniels knew that he was about to witness something truly terrible. As the suited men reached into their jackets, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a grave mistake in coming here. The air in the farmhouse was thick with anticipation as the suited men reached into their jackets, their movements slow and deliberate. Sheriff Daniels felt his heart pounding in his chest, his hand gripping the handle of his sidearm as he braced himself for the worst. But instead of drawing weapons, the men produced a stack of papers, which they handed to Mr. Hansen with a smug flourish. What's this? The old farmer asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. A court order, one of the suited men replied, his voice dripping with satisfaction. It seems the HOA has obtained a ruling that allows us to take possession of this property immediately. Mr. Hansen's eyes widened, and he quickly scanned the documents, his face growing pale with each passing second. This can't be, he muttered, his voice trembling. Edith Hansen let out a horrified gasp, her grip on the child tightening. No, you can't do this. This is our home. Karen Wilkins stepped forward, a triumphant smile on her face. I'm afraid they can, Mrs. Hansen. The HOA has been working on this for months, and now the law is on our side. Sheriff Daniels felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach as he watched the Hansens' world crumble around them. He had known that the HOA was powerful, but he had never imagined they would go to such lengths to seize a family's property. This is an outrage, Mr. Hansen roared, his face flushed with rage. You can't just barge in here and take everything we've worked for. The suited men exchanged a glance, and one of them stepped forward, his expression calm and unruffled. I'm afraid we can, Mr. Hansen. The court has ruled in our favor, and we're well within our rights to enforce this order. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the room. Hold on a minute, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging within him. This seems like an awfully heavy-handed tactic, even for the HOA. Are you sure this is all on the up and up? Karen Wilkins turned to the sheriff, her eyes narrowing. Of course it is, Sheriff. The HOA has followed all the proper legal channels, and the court has ruled in our favor. You have no grounds to interfere. The sheriff's gaze shifted to the Hansens, and he could see the raw fear and desperation in their eyes. I'm not comfortable with this, he said, his voice firm. This family has lived here for generations, and they deserve a fair chance to defend their property. One of the suited men stepped forward, his expression hardening. Sheriff, I'm afraid you're overstepping your bounds. This is a matter for the courts, not the local law enforcement. If you continue to interfere, we'll have no choice but to take this to a higher authority. Sheriff Daniels felt the weight of the decision bearing down on him. He knew that he was treading on dangerous ground, But the thought of watching this family lose everything they had worked for was too much for him to bear. "I'm sorry, but I can't in good conscience allow you to evict this family without giving them a chance to fight this in court," he said, his hand moving to the holster of his sidearm. The suited men exchanged a tense glance, and Karen Wilkins' face flushed with fury. "Sheriff, you're making a grave mistake," she hissed. The tension in the room was palpable, and Sheriff Daniels knew that he was about to step into a maelstrom of corruption and deceit that would test the very limits of his principles. The farmhouse was a tense battlefield, the air thick with the smell of confrontation. Sheriff Daniels stood his ground, his hand hovering near his sidearm as he faced off against the suited men and the implacable Karen Wilkins. "I'm afraid I can't allow you to forcibly remove this family from their home," the sheriff said, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging within him. "Not without giving them a chance to defend themselves in court." Karen Wilkins' face contorted with rage, her carefully constructed veneer of civility crumbling away. "You're making a grave mistake, Sheriff," she spat. "The HOA has powerful connections, and we won't hesitate to use them if you continue to interfere." One of the suited men stepped forward, his expression cool and calculated. "Mrs. Wilkins is right, Sheriff. You're treading on very thin ice here. I'd advise you to reconsider your position before you find yourself in a world of trouble." Sheriff Daniels held his ground, his jaw set in a determined line. "I've made my decision, and I'm not going to back down. This family deserves their day in court, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let you take that away from them." The tension in the room was palpable, the air practically crackling with the threat of violence. Edith Hansen held her child close, her eyes wide with terror, while Mr. Hansen stood beside her, his fists clenched at his sides. Suddenly, a loud commotion from outside drew their attention. The sound of sirens pierced the air, and the sheriff's radio crackled to life. "Asterisk all units. We have reports of a disturbance at the Hansen farm. Requesting immediate backup. Asterisk." Sheriff Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that this was no mere coincidence. Someone had called in a false alarm, and he had a sinking suspicion that he knew exactly who was behind it. The suited men exchanged a knowing glance, and one of them turned to Karen Wilkins with a hint of a smile. "It would appear our backup has arrived, Mrs. Wilkins. Shall we?" Karen's lips curled into a triumphant grin. "By all means, gentlemen. Let's not keep them waiting." The sheriff felt his heart sink as he realized the true depth of the corruption he was facing. These people had planned this all along, using the full force of the law to crush the Hansens and seize their property. "You can't do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is wrong, and I won't let you get away with it." Karen Wilkins turned to him, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Oh, Sheriff, you're in way over your head. This is just the beginning. Once we've taken care of the Hansens, we'll be coming for the rest of this community, and there's nothing you can do to stop us." The sound of tires on gravel drew their attention, and a fleet of police cruisers came into view, their sirens blaring. Sheriff Daniels felt a glimmer of hope, but that hope quickly turned to dread as he saw the officers emerging from the vehicles. They were not the familiar faces of his own deputies, but rather a contingent of heavily armed officers in tactical gear, their expressions cold and unreadable. The suited men stepped forward, their confidence unwavering. "Gentlemen, we've been expecting you. The Hansens are in violation of HOA regulations, and we're here to ensure that they comply." The lead officer nodded, his gaze sweeping over the scene. "Understood, sir. We'll handle this situation immediately." Sheriff Daniels watched in horror as the officers surged forward, their weapons drawn, and the Hansens were torn from their home, their cries of anguish echoing through the night. He had failed them, and now he knew that the true battle was only just beginning. The farmhouse had descended into chaos, the Hansens' desperate pleas for help drowned out by the deafening roar of the tactical team's radios and the frantic shouts of the suited men. Sheriff Daniels felt a deep sense of helplessness as he watched the family being forcibly removed from their home, their belongings scattered in the mud and rain. Karen Wilkins stood off to the side, her expression one of triumphant glee, and the sheriff knew that she was the true architect of this nightmare. As the Hansons were loaded into the back of a police van, Mr. Hanson's eyes locked with the sheriff's, a silent plea for help etched into his weathered features. "Why are you doing this?" the old farmer cried, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is our home." The lead officer, his face hidden behind a black mask, turned to Mr. Hanson with a cold indifference. "Orders are orders, sir. You're in violation of HOA regulations, and we're here to ensure compliance." Edith Hanson, her face streaked with tears, clutched her child close, her entire body trembling. "Please, you have to understand," she pleaded. "This is all we have. Where will we go?" The officer shook his head, his grip tightening on his weapon. "That's not my concern, ma'am. You and your family need to come with us." Sheriff Daniels felt a surge of rage, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He knew that he was powerless to stop this, that the corrupt forces at play had orchestrated this entire scenario with ruthless efficiency. As the Hansons were led away, Karen Wilkins approached the sheriff, her expression one of unbridled triumph. "Well, well, Sheriff," she purred, "it would appear that the law is on our side after all." Daniels glared at her, his jaw set in a determined line. "This isn't over, Wilkins. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and I'm going to make sure you and your cronies pay for what you've done." Karen's smile widened, and she leaned in close, her breath hot on the sheriff's face. "Oh, Sheriff, you have no idea what you're up against. The HOA has deep pockets and powerful connections, and we're not about to let some small-town law enforcement officer stand in our way." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine, and he knew that he was treading on dangerous ground. But he also knew that he couldn't just stand by and let this injustice stand. He had to find a way to fight back, to expose the corruption at the heart of the HOA, and restore justice to this community. As the last of the Hansons' belongings were loaded into the van, the suited men turned to the sheriff, their expressions smug and self-assured. "Well, Sheriff, it would appear that our business here is done," one of them said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We'll be sure to keep you informed of any further developments." Daniels watched in silence as the men climbed into their SUV and drove away, the sound of the Hansons' anguished cries still ringing in his ears. He knew that he had to act, and act quickly, if he was going to have any chance of saving this family and unraveling the web of corruption that had ensnared his community. With a deep breath, he turned and headed back to his cruiser, his mind racing with 1,000 different strategies and plans. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched, but he wasn't about to give up without a fight. The battle lines had been drawn, and the sheriff knew that he was about to step into the heart of a war that would test the very limits of his principles and his resolve. The rain had stopped, but the chill in the air seemed to seep into Sheriff Daniels' very bones as he sat in his patrol car, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. He had failed the Hansons, and the guilt of that failure weighed heavily on his conscience. But he knew that he couldn't dwell on it. There was work to be done, a war to be fought. Reaching for his radio, Daniels called in a request for backup, his voice steady and determined. He needed to gather his deputies, to coordinate a plan of attack against the formidable forces of the HOA. As he waited for his team to assemble, Daniels replayed the events of the evening in his mind, searching for any clue, any leverage he could use to turn the tide. And then it hit him, the court order. Reaching into his glove compartment, he pulled out the stack of papers the suited men had presented to the Hansons. His eyes scanned the document, his brow furrowing with each passing line. Something wasn't right. The wording was vague, the signatures questionable, and the judge's name, well, that was a name Daniels didn't recognize at all. The plan began to take shape in the sheriff's mind, and he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. If he could prove that the court order was fraudulent, he might just have a chance of overturning the Hansons' eviction and exposing the corruption at the heart of the HOA. The sound of approaching sirens drew Daniels' attention, and he stepped out of his car to greet his deputies, his expression grim but determined. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We've got a major problem on our hands, and I need all of you to be on your game. The HOA has pulled some dirty tricks to seize the Hanson farm, and I need your help to fight back." The deputies exchanged uneasy glances, but Daniels could see the resolve in their eyes. They were a tight-knit team, loyal to a fault, and he knew he could count on them to have his back. "We've got to move fast," Daniels continued, "before the HOA can solidify their hold on the Hansen property. I want you all to fan out, talk to the neighbors, see if anyone has any information that could help us prove that the court order was obtained through fraudulent means." The deputies nodded, their expressions hardening with determination. "You got it, Sheriff," one of them said, already turning to head out. Daniels watched as his team dispersed, their tires kicking up gravel as they sped off into the night. He knew that time was of the essence, and that every second counted. Climbing back into his patrol car, Daniels took one last look at the court order, his eyes narrowing as he noticed a small detail that had escaped his notice earlier. The address listed on the document was not the Hansen farm, but rather a vacant lot several miles away. It was a sloppy mistake, one that Daniels was certain the HOA had not intended to make. With a grim smile, the sheriff started his engine and headed out, determined to expose the truth and bring the Hansens home. As he drove, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that he was venturing into uncharted territory, a world of corruption and deceit that threatened to swallow him whole. But he refused to back down, his sense of duty and his unwavering moral compass driving him forward. The battle lines had been drawn, and the sheriff knew that he was about to enter a high-stakes confrontation that would test the very limits of his resolve. The night was still and silent as Sheriff Daniels pulled up to the address listed on the suspicious court order, his headlights cutting through the darkness. His deputies had fanned out across the community, gathering information and piecing together the web of deceit that had ensnared the Hansen family. Daniels stepped out of his car, his hand resting on the holster of his sidearm as he surveyed the vacant lot. It was a nondescript patch of land, nothing more than a stretch of overgrown grass and weeds, with no sign of the Hansen farm that the order had claimed to be targeting. Taking a deep breath, Daniels approached the address, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of activity. As he drew closer, he noticed a glint of metal in the shadows, and his heart raced as he recognized the distinctive shape of a security camera. "So, you're watching, are you?" Daniels muttered under his breath, his gaze sweeping the lot for any other signs of surveillance. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered by the sound of a car engine, and Daniels whirled around to see a sleek black SUV pulling up to the curb. The suited men from earlier stepped out, their expressions a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Sheriff Daniels," one of them said, his voice dripping with false civility. "What are you doing here?" Daniels stepped forward, his chin raised in defiance. "I'm here to expose the truth, Mr. Sutton. This court order you've been using is a sham, and I've got the proof to back it up." Sutton's eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a glance with his companion. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Sheriff. The court order is completely legitimate, and we're well within our rights to enforce it." Daniels shook his head, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I noticed a little detail that you seem to have missed. The address on the order doesn't match the Hansen farm at all. In fact, it's a vacant lot, just like this one." Sutton's expression darkened, and he took a step forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Sheriff, but I can assure you that it's not going to end well for you." Daniels held his ground, his hand tightening on the grip of his sidearm. "It's not a game, Sutton. You and your cronies in the HOA have been using illegal means to seize the Hansen property, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows about it." Sutton let out a low chuckle, his hand emerging from his jacket with a small device in his grasp. "You have no idea what you're up against, Sheriff. The HOA has eyes and ears everywhere, and we're not about to let some small-town lawman get in our way." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine as Sutton pressed a button on the device, and the night was suddenly filled with the sound of sirens. Within moments, a fleet of police cruisers swarmed the vacant lot, their lights flashing and their sirens blaring. But as Daniels watched the officers emerge from their vehicles, he knew that something was wrong. Their uniforms were unfamiliar, and their expressions were cold and unreadable. The same officers who had evicted the Hansens earlier that night. Sutton turned to Daniels, a triumphant grin on his face. "You see, Sheriff, we have friends in high places. And we're not about to let anyone, not even you, stand in our way." Daniels felt a knot of dread form in the pit of his stomach as the officers approached, their weapons drawn. He knew that he was outmatched, outgunned, and outmaneuvered, but he refused to back down. As the officers closed in, Daniels braced himself for the inevitable, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. He had failed the Hansons, but he would be damned if he let the HOA win this war. The battle lines had been drawn, and the final confrontation was about to begin.